Sometimes a single moment changes everything you thought you knew about yourself. In the dead of winter, tech millionaire Isaiah Reed discovers something that will alter his life forever. A 6-year-old girl named Lila, chained to a tree. Isaiah came to these remote woods seeking solitude after a painful betrayal. But finding this frightened child forces him to confront memories of his own childhood in foster care. What begins as a rescue becomes something deeper as Isaiah fights to protect Lila while learning to open his heart. This is a story about two souls finding family most unexpectedly. But what dark forces put Lila in those chains? And will Isaiah's past make him the perfect protector or put them in danger? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The gravel road crunched beneath the wheels of Isaiah Reed's Range Rover as he navigated the final mile to his destination. Snow had been falling steadily for 3 hours, and the windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the accumulation. At 55, Isaiah had learned to appreciate silence. But the quiet of these Adirondack mountains felt different, heavier, more profound than the manufactured calm of his Manhattan penthouse. He hadn't been back to his mother's cabin in 8 years, not since her funeral. The lawyers had been pestering him to sell the property, citing maintenance costs and declining market value in such a remote location. But something about the betrayal 3 weeks ago, Marcus stealing not just company secrets but 20 years of trust, had drawn him back to this place where his mother had found peace in her final years. The cabin appeared through the snow, like a memory materializing, smaller than he remembered, with weathered cedar siding and a stone chimney that promised warmth. Isaiah parked and sat for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled. Through the windshield, he could see the front porch where his mother used to sit with her morning coffee, watching the sun rise over Whiteface Mountain. Estelle Reed had been a force of nature, 5 feet 2 inches of determination wrapped in gentle wisdom. She'd raised him alone, after adopting him from the state system when he was 12, too old for most families to consider. By then, Isaiah had been through 7 foster homes, each placement chipping away at his ability to trust, to hope, to believe that anyone would choose to keep him. But Estelle had seen something in the angry, guarded boy the caseworkers described as challenging. She'd brought him to this very cabin that first summer, teaching him to fish in the stream that ran behind the property, showing him how to identify bird calls and track deer through the woods. Most importantly, she'd shown him what unconditional love looked like. Patient, consistent, unwavering, even when he pushed every boundary to test if she'd give up on him like all the others. Isaiah grabbed his duffel bag from the passenger seat and trudged through the snow to the front door. The key was exactly where Estelle had always kept it, under the 3rd loose stone in the porch foundation. Some things never changed, even when everything else fell apart. The interior smelled of cedar and old memories. Dust motes danced in the pale afternoon light, filtering through windows that hadn't been cleaned in months. Everything was exactly as his mother had left it. Hand-knitted afghans draped over the sofa, her collection of mystery novels arranged on the mantelpiece, the chess set permanently positioned for a game they'd never finish. Isaiah dropped his bag and moved to the kitchen, running his hand along the worn butcher block counter where Estelle had taught him to make her famous apple pie. The refrigerator hummed to life when he plugged it in, and he was grateful the caretaker had kept the power on. Small mercies. It was while checking the bedroom that he found it, his mother's leather journal, tucked into the drawer of her nightstand, like she'd placed it there yesterday. The cover was worn smooth from years of handling, and her name was embossed in fading gold letters, E. M. Reed. Isaiah hesitated before opening it. Estelle had always been private about her writing, retreating to this room after dinner to record her thoughts. He'd respected that boundary then, but grief and curiosity won out now. The entries spanned the last 5 years of her life, written in her careful script. Random observations about weather, wildlife, the changing seasons. But as he read deeper, themes emerged: forgiveness, family, the courage required to love fully despite the risk of loss. One entry, dated just 6 months before her death, stopped him cold. Isaiah carries his childhood like armor, protecting him but also isolating him. He's built an empire, gained the respect of peers, accumulated wealth beyond imagination. But he's still that 12-year-old boy who's afraid to trust, afraid to need anyone. I pray that someday he'll find someone who needs him more than he needs his walls. Perhaps in giving love unconditionally, he'll finally understand that he's worthy of receiving it. Isaiah closed the journal and sat heavily on the edge of the bed. Even from the grave, his mother could read him like an open book. The betrayal with Marcus had stung so deeply, precisely because Isaiah had allowed himself to trust. 20 years of partnership, of shared dreams and late-night strategy sessions, dissolved in an instant when he discovered the stolen proprietary code and the competing company Marcus had been secretly funding. The business world had called. It brilliant. Marcus positioned himself as the wronged party, claiming Isaiah's controlling nature had forced him to seek alternatives. The media loved the narrative of the intense, isolated tech genius finally getting his comeuppance. Isaiah's stock holdings had plummeted overnight, and half his executive team had followed Marcus to the new venture, but the financial loss paled compared to the emotional devastation. Isaiah had thought of Marcus as the brother he'd never had, the one person who truly understood his vision for using technology to solve real-world problems. Instead, Marcus had been calculating every move, every shared confidence, every vulnerable moment, waiting for the perfect time to strike. The cabin grew darker as afternoon faded to evening. Isaiah made a fire in the old stone hearth, remembering his mother's patient instruction about kindling and airflow. The flames caught and held, casting dancing shadows on the knotty pine walls. He prepared a simple dinner from the supplies he'd brought. Nothing fancy, just the kind of comfort food Estelle would have approved of. As he ate, he found himself listening to the sounds of the wilderness settling in for the night. An owl called from somewhere deep in the woods. Wind sighed through the bare branches of the oak trees. Snow continued to fall, muffling the world in pristine silence. This was what he'd come for: distance from the noise, the constant demands, the relentless pace of a life that had somehow become about accumulating rather than living. Estelle had understood that danger. Her journal entries spoke frequently about the difference between success and fulfillment, between building walls and building bridges. Isaiah poured himself a modest glass of bourbon, a bottle he'd found in the pantry, with a note for when you need to remember who you really are. Mom. Even her foresight amazed him. As the fire burned lower, he found himself thinking about the boy he'd been when Estelle first brought him here. Angry, suspicious, convinced that every kindness was a manipulation, every offer of love a setup for disappointment. She'd worn down his defenses not through grand gestures, but through consistency. The same bedtime story every night, the same gentle correction when he lashed out, the same patient explanation that families don't give up on each other. It had taken 3 years for him to call her mom. By then, she'd already been acting like his mother for so long that the word felt natural, inevitable. She'd cried when he said it, tears of joy that she didn't bother to hide. Now, decades later, Isaiah wondered if he'd honored that gift or squandered it. He'd certainly achieved everything Estelle had believed he was capable of: financial success, recognition, the power to influence entire industries. But sitting alone in this cabin where she'd nurtured his healing, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd missed the point entirely. The journal lay open beside him, and his eyes fell on another passage. True strength isn't in protecting yourself from pain. It's in being willing to be hurt for the sake of something greater. Love requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires courage. I see that courage in Isaiah, buried beneath years of self-protection. Someday, something will call it forth. Isaiah finished his bourbon and banked the fire for the night. Tomorrow he'd explore the property, maybe hike the trail to the waterfall where he and Estelle used to picnic. For now, he was content to be still, to let the mountain silence work its way into his bones. Outside, snow continued to fall on a world that seemed frozen in time. In a few hours, that perfect stillness would be shattered by a discovery that would change everything Isaiah thought he knew about himself, about family, about the courage required to love without conditions. But for now, he slept peacefully in his mother's bed, her journal on the nightstand beside him, her words about love and vulnerability weaving themselves into his dreams. Isaiah woke before dawn, a habit ingrained from decades of early morning conference calls and global business coordination. But here in the mountains, with no urgent emails demanding attention, he found himself appreciating the gradual transition from night to day. He made coffee the way his mother had taught him, strong, black, with a patience that corporate life had nearly squeezed out of him. The snow had stopped sometime during the night, leaving the world wrapped in pristine white. Through the kitchen window, he watched cardinals flash red against the monochrome landscape. Estelle would have loved this morning. She'd always said, winter was nature's way of teaching humans about beauty in stillness. Isaiah bundled into his heavy coat and stepped onto the porch, coffee mug steaming in the crisp air. The temperature had dropped overnight, probably well below zero. His breath formed clouds that dissipated quickly in the dry air. Perfect morning for a walk to clear his head and explore the boundaries of the property he'd neglected for too long. He'd made it perhaps 200 yards from the cabin when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost dismissed it as wind through the branches, but there it was again, carried on the still air like a whisper, crying. Definitely human, definitely young. Isaiah stopped, every sense alert. The sound came from deeper in the woods, toward the old oak grove where he and his mother used to collect acorns. His pace quickened, boots crunching through snow that reached nearly to his knees in places. The crying grew clearer as he approached the grove, and with it came a terrible certainty that something was very wrong. When the massive oak tree came into view, Isaiah's coffee mug slipped from numb fingers, dark liquid staining the pristine snow. A child sat at the base of the ancient tree, back pressed against the rough bark, not sitting, chained. Heavy links of rusted metal bound her thin wrists to a length of chain that wrapped around the tree's enormous trunk. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old, dressed in clothes too thin for the bitter cold. A faded pink sweatshirt, torn jeans, sneakers that were completely inadequate for the conditions. Her skin was dark brown, almost purple-tinged from cold, and her small body shook with violent shivers. When she saw Isaiah approaching, her eyes went wide with terror, and she pressed herself harder against the tree, as if trying to disappear into the bark. "Hey there, sweetie." Isaiah kept his voice gentle, non-threatening, even as rage burned through his chest. What kind of monster would do this to a child? "It's okay. I'm here to help." The girl said nothing, just stared at him with eyes that held far too much knowledge for someone so young. Her lips were blue, and she was having trouble controlling the chattering of her teeth. Isaiah knelt in the snow, careful to keep some distance so he wouldn't frighten her further. "My name is Isaiah. What's your name, honey?" Still no response. But he noticed she was clutching something against her chest, a small wooden cross on a thin leather cord. The necklace appeared to be the only thing of value she possessed, worn smooth by countless worried touches. "Can you tell me how long you've been here?" Isaiah tried again, already knowing the answer didn't matter. Every minute in this cold was potentially fatal for a child her size. When she remained silent, Isaiah made a decision. "I'm going to get these chains off you, okay? I need to go back to my cabin and get some tools, but I'll be right back. I promise I'm not leaving you." He started to stand, but her voice stopped him, barely a whisper, hoarse from cold and crying. Don't leave me." Isaiah's heart broke. He shrugged out of his heavy coat and wrapped it around the girl's shivering form. It was massive on her small frame, but it would provide some warmth while he worked. "I won't leave you. I'm just going to get something to cut these chains. Can you hold on for just a few more minutes?" She nodded, tiny fingers gripping the wooden cross so tightly her knuckles were white. Isaiah ran back to the cabin faster than he'd moved in years, adrenaline and protective fury driving him through the deep snow. He grabbed a bolt cutter from his mother's tool shed, then added a heavy blanket, first aid supplies, and a thermos of hot soup to a backpack. When he returned to the oak tree, the girl was exactly where he'd left her, though she seemed smaller somehow, more fragile. Isaiah knelt beside her and examined the chains. They were old but solid, the kind used for heavy-duty applications. Whoever had done this had planned it carefully. "This might be loud," Isaiah warned, positioning the bolt cutters on the first link. "But it won't hurt you." The metal gave way with a sharp crack that echoed through the silent woods. The girl flinched but didn't cry out. Isaiah worked methodically, cutting each link until the chain fell away from her wrists. Angry red marks circled her thin arms where the metal had chafed. "There we go." Isaiah tried to keep his voice calm despite the fury coursing through him. "Let's get you somewhere warm." He wrapped the blanket around both her and his coat, then carefully lifted her. She was lighter than she should have been, definitely undernourished. As he carried her back toward the cabin, he felt her small body gradually stop shivering as his body heat began to warm her. "Almost there, sweetheart. We're going to get you all fixed up." Inside the cabin, Isaiah built up the fire until it roared. In the hearth, then settled the girl on the sofa with multiple blankets. She watched his every movement with those two knowing eyes, fingers still clutching the wooden cross. "Are you hungry?" Isaiah asked, already heating soup on the stove. When she nodded, he brought her a mug of the warm broth and watched her drink. It slowly, carefully, like someone who'd learned not to take sustenance for granted. The immediate crisis handled, Isaiah found himself facing a dozen questions. Who was this child? How had she ended up chained to a tree on his property? Where were her parents? And most pressing, who was responsible for this atrocity? "Can you—" "And tell me your name now," Isaiah asked gently, settling into the chair across from her. "Lila," she whispered, voice still hoarse. "That's a beautiful name. How old are you, Lila?" She held up 6 fingers, the movement still trembling slightly. "Do you remember how you got to the tree?" Lila's face shut down immediately, eyes going vacant in a way that made Isaiah's chest tight with recognition. He'd worn that same expression in his early foster placements, the protective disconnection of a child who'd learned that remembering was too dangerous. "That's okay," Isaiah said quickly. "You don't have to talk about anything you don't want to. Right now, we just need to get you warm and safe." But even as he spoke the words, Isaiah was wrestling with an impossible decision. The right thing, the legal thing, would be to call the authorities immediately, report the crime, get Lila into the system where trained professionals could help her. But everything in his experience screamed against that choice. He'd been in that system. He knew how it could fail children, especially traumatized ones. The wooden cross she clutched suggested religious background. Would she end up in some institutional setting that couldn't provide the patient, individual attention she'd need to heal? And there was something else, something he couldn't quite name yet. Looking at this frightened, wounded child, Isaiah felt something shift inside his chest. The same protective instinct that had driven him to cut those chains was still burning, stronger now that she was safe in his care. "Lila," he said, softly, "are you hurt anywhere? Besides your wrists, I mean." She shook her head, but Isaiah wasn't convinced. He made a mental note to insist on a medical examination once he figured out the best way to handle this situation. For now, he focused on the immediate needs: warmth, food, safety, and the gradual building of trust. The girl was already drowsing. In the warmth of the fire, exhaustion finally overtaking adrenaline. Her grip on the wooden cross relaxed slightly, though she didn't let go entirely. Isaiah watched her sleep and felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with profit margins or market dominance. This child needed him, and for the first time since Marcus's betrayal, that felt like enough. Outside, the winter wind picked up, rattling the windows and reminding him of how close he'd come to losing her to the cold. Someone had left Lila to die, and only chance, or providence, had led him to that grove this morning. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen, Isaiah made another pot of soup and settled in to keep watch. He'd call someone, eventually, but not yet. First, he needed to understand who Lila was and what had happened to her. He needed to know that the people he'd entrust with her care would protect rather than fail her. Most of all, he needed to figure out why holding this small, wounded child felt like coming home in a way his empty penthouse never had. Lila slept for 14 hours straight, curled beneath the quilts his mother had made, her small fingers never releasing the wooden cross. Isaiah dozed fitfully in the armchair beside the sofa, startling awake each time she stirred or whimpered in her sleep. When morning finally came, he found her watching him with those careful, assessing eyes. "Good morning, sweetheart," Isaiah said softly. "How are you feeling?" She didn't answer, but her stomach responded with a loud growl that made her cheeks flush pink. Isaiah smiled. "I think that means breakfast. What would you like?" Still silence, but she was tracking his movements. As he walked to the kitchen, Isaiah opened cabinets, narrating his search. "Let's see, I've got oatmeal, eggs, some bread for toast. Oh, and I think there might be some jam in here somewhere." He prepared oatmeal with brown sugar and butter, the way Estelle used to make it for him during those first uncertain months when everything was a potential battle. When he brought the bowl to Lila, she accepted it carefully, eating small, methodical spoonfuls, like someone who'd learned not to waste food. While she ate, Isaiah retrieved something from his bedroom, a manila folder he'd brought from the city, without really knowing why. His own foster care records, obtained years ago when he'd needed them for some legal documentation. He hadn't looked at them in decades, but something about Lila's presence had made him dig them out. The papers were dog-eared from handling, official stamps and caseworker signatures documenting the trajectory of a childhood he preferred not to remember. Placement after placement, each one detailed with clinical precision. Subject exhibits behavioral challenges, difficulty with attachment, recommend therapeutic intervention. Reading them now, Isaiah saw past the bureaucratic language to the frightened boy he'd been. 12 years old and already labeled difficult, shuffled between homes where he was either ignored or actively resented. The Hendersons, who'd made him sleep in the garage when he wet the bed. The Morales family, who'd fed him last and least. The Johnsons, who'd simply disappeared one day, leaving him sitting on the front steps with his garbage bag of belongings until the caseworker arrived. Each failed placement had taught him the same lesson. Don't get attached, don't hope, don't trust. By the time Estelle found him, he'd been more feral animal than child, ready to fight or flee at the first sign of disappointment. "Lila," Isaiah said gently, setting the records aside. "Do you know where your family is?" She shook her head, a movement so small he almost missed it. "Do you remember living anywhere before yesterday?" Another shake, but this one was different. Not no, but I don't want to remember. Isaiah understood that distinction intimately. There were entire years of his childhood that existed as grey static in his memory, his mind's way of protecting him from experiences too traumatic to process. He tried a different approach. "Are you hurt anywhere? I should probably check to make sure you're okay." Lila pulled the quilts tighter around herself, suddenly defensive. Isaiah held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "Just to make sure nothing needs medical attention. I won't hurt you, I promise." It took another 20 minutes of patient coaxing before she let him examine her arms and check for injuries. The chain marks were the worst of it, angry red welts that would take weeks to heal. But there were other signs too, old bruises fading, a yellow, a small scar on her shoulder that looked deliberate rather than accidental. Isaiah's hands shook as he applied antibiotic ointment to the chain marks. Someone had hurt this child systematically, and the wooden cross around her neck suggested she'd been taught to endure it in silence, to find comfort in faith rather than fighting back. "There," he said, finishing with the bandages. "That should help them heal." Lila touched the bandages tentatively, then looked up at him with something that might have been gratitude. It was the first real expression he'd seen from her, and it hit him like a physical blow. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Isaiah made phone calls to his assistant, pushing back meetings and claiming a family emergency. Not entirely untrue. Lila sat by the fire, occasionally drawing shapes in the condensation on the windows, but mostly just watching him with that unnervingly mature attention. Around noon, Isaiah found her standing in front of the bookshelf, studying the spines of his mother's mystery novels. He pulled down a children's book he remembered from his own time here, Where the Red Fern Grows, and offered it to her. "Can you read?" he asked. Lila nodded and accepted the book, running her fingers over the cover with something approaching reverence. When she opened it and began to read silently, Isaiah noticed her lips moving slightly with the words, "Advanced reading skills for a 6-year-old, which suggested educational background before whatever had led to her chaining. It was, watching her read, that the first real plan began to form in Isaiah's mind. He wouldn't just turn her over to the authorities without knowing more about her situation. But keeping her here indefinitely wasn't realistic either. He needed to understand what had happened to her, who was responsible, and what options existed for her care. More immediately, he needed clothes that fit her, proper food for a growing child, and probably medical attention beyond his basic first aid. "Lila," he said, settling beside her on the sofa, "would you be okay if I went to town for a little while, just to get some things we need?" Panic flashed across her face, and she grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "I won't leave you," Isaiah said quickly. "You can come with me, or if you'd rather stay here, I'll be back in 2 hours, I promise." She considered this, looking around the warm, safe space of the cabin, then at Isaiah's face. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. 2 hours, she said, the first complete words he'd heard from her. 2 hours. Isaiah confirmed. "There's soup on the stove if you get hungry, and the fire should stay warm. If anything scares you, anything at all, you call my name, and I'll come right back." The drive to town gave Isaiah time to think, really think, about what he was doing. Legally, he was probably already in violation of several statutes. Morally, though, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was exactly where he needed to be, in the general store. He bought clothes in what he guessed was her size, warm pajamas, children's vitamins, art supplies, and more books. The elderly clerk, Mrs. Patterson according to her name tag, watched his purchases with curious eyes. "Granddaughter visiting?" she asked pleasantly. "Something like that," Isaiah replied, not quite lying, as he drove back to the cabin. Packages. Filling the back seat, Isaiah found himself thinking about his foster care records again. All those placements that had failed, all those adults who'd seen him as a problem to be managed rather than a child to be loved. He pulled into the cabin's driveway exactly 1 hour and 53 minutes after leaving. Through the window he could see Lila exactly where he'd left her, books still in her lap, but now she was watching the road, waiting for his return. When he walked through the door, her whole body relaxed in visible relief. That trust, fragile and hard-won, felt more valuable than any business success he'd ever achieved. "I brought you some things," Isaiah said, unpacking the bags. "Clothes that should fit better, some books, and—" he pulled out a set of colored pencils and a sketch pad. "I thought you might like to draw." Lila accepted each item like it was precious, examining the clothes and running her fingers over the smooth paper of the sketch pad. When she looked up at him, her eyes held a question. "He couldn't quite read. They're yours," Isaiah said gently, "to keep." For the first time since he'd found her, Lila smiled, a small, tentative expression that transformed her entire face. In that moment, Isaiah understood something fundamental about himself. This wasn't about rescue or charity or even justice. This was about family. Over the next 3 days, a routine emerged between them. Isaiah woke early and made coffee, while Lila slept, curled on the sofa, her new clothes folded neatly on the nearby chair. She insisted on sleeping there rather than in the bedroom, where she could see all the exits and keep the front door in sight. Isaiah understood that need for strategic positioning. He'd slept the same way in his early foster placements. Breakfast was quiet but companionable. Lila had begun responding to direct questions with nods or single words, though she still hadn't volunteered information about her past. Isaiah didn't push. He remembered how it felt when well-meaning adults probed at wounds that hadn't healed yet. It was on the third morning that Lila picked up the colored pencils for the first time. Isaiah was reading news on his laptop at the kitchen table when he heard the soft scratching of pencil on paper. When he looked over, she was completely absorbed in her work, tongue poking out slightly in concentration. "What are you drawing?" Isaiah asked. Lila held up the paper, a house drawn in brown crayon, with a careful garden of flowers in front and a smiling sun overhead. Normal 6-year-old artwork, except for the bars Isaiah realized were drawn across every window. "That's beautiful," he said carefully. "Is that a house you remember?" Lila nodded, already starting on a new drawing. This one showed stick figures. A woman with long hair, a man with broad shoulders, and a small figure that was clearly meant to be a child. All 3 figures had enormous smiles, but the child figure was separated from the adults by what looked like a fence. Isaiah felt his chest tighten. "Is that your family?" Another nod, but Lila's attention was already moving to a third drawing. This one was different. Darker, with heavy black lines and aggressive red scribbles. In the center was a small figure lying down, surrounded by larger figures that seemed to loom over it. "Lila," Isaiah said gently, "can you tell me about this?" "Picture?" She looked up at him, and for a moment her carefully controlled expression cracked. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she set down the red crayon and reached for the black one, adding more heavy lines to the drawing until the small figure was almost completely obscured. Isaiah moved to sit beside her on the floor, careful not to touch her or crowd her space. "Sometimes drawing helps us remember things that are hard to think about." Lila nodded, wiping her nose on her sleeve. She picked up the brown crayon again and started a new drawing. This, one of the oak tree where Isaiah had found her. But in her version, the tree had eyes and a mouth, and it looked sad. "The tree was sad?" Isaiah asked. "Because I was scared," Lila whispered. "Trees don't like when children are scared." It was the longest sentence she'd spoken, and Isaiah felt his throat close up. This child who'd been chained and abandoned was worried about the tree's feelings. "You're right," Isaiah said. "Trees are very wise. They want children to be safe and happy." Lila considered this, then picked up the green crayon and added leaves to the sad tree. Big, full leaves that seemed to be sheltering something underneath. The drawings continued throughout the day. Some were innocent: birds, flowers, the cabin with smoke coming from the chimney. Others were disturbing in their implications. Dark rooms with no doors, adults with no faces, a small figure hiding under furniture. But it was the final drawing of the day that stopped Isaiah cold. Lila had drawn 2 figures standing in front of the cabin, a tall man and a small girl, both with detailed faces and careful attention to clothing. The man was holding the girl's hand, and both figures were smiling. At the bottom, in careful block letters, Lila had written, "Family." That evening, after Lila had fallen asleep clutching her wooden cross, Isaiah sat in the kitchen reviewing the day's artwork. Each drawing told a piece of her story: neglect, abuse, abandonment, but also hope and resilience. The progression, from the barred windows to the protective tree to the final family portrait, suggested a child who was beginning to feel safe enough to imagine a future. Isaiah's phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. Several reporters have been calling about your whereabouts. Should I give them the family emergency story? He stared at the message, realizing he'd barely thought about his corporate life since finding Lila. The betrayal that had driven him to the mountains seemed less important now, dwarfed by the immediate needs of a child who depended on him completely. But the mention of reporters made him uneasy. If media attention found him here, if Lila's story became public before he could protect her properly. Another text came through, this one from an unknown number. Missing children in your area. Have you seen anything suspicious? Isaiah's blood ran cold. He immediately called the number back, but it went straight to voicemail. No identifying information, no official agency mentioned. Something about the message felt wrong. Too vague, too casual for law enforcement. He spent the next hour searching online for missing children reports in the area. There were several, going back months, but none matched Lila's description exactly. Most disturbing was what he didn't find. No recent reports, no Amber Alerts, no desperate families pleading for their child's return. It was as if Lila had simply materialized in those chains, with no one looking for her. Isaiah checked the doors and windows, ensuring everything was securely locked. Then he settled back into the armchair beside the sofa, watching Lila sleep and thinking about the implications of that anonymous text. Someone knew she was missing. Someone might even know where she was now. But the lack of official channels, the absence of proper law enforcement protocols, suggested that whoever was looking for Lila might not have her best interests at heart. The next morning brought snow. Again, heavy flakes that obscured the windows and muffled all sound from outside. Isaiah made breakfast while Lila sat at the table with her drawing supplies, already working on something new. "What are you making today?" Isaiah asked, setting. A plate of eggs and toast in front of her. Lila held up her work, a drawing of two figures building a snowman. The detail was remarkable for a 6-year-old, showing real artistic talent in the way she captured expressions and movement. "That's us," she said, pointing to the figures. "Building a snow friend. Would you like to do that? Build a real snowman?" Lila's face lit up, the first time he'd seen genuine excitement from her. "Can we?" "Absolutely, right after breakfast." They spent the morning in the snow, Lila laughing as they rolled the snowman's body and argued over the perfect placement of stick arms. She'd found an old hat of Estelle's to complete their creation, and she stood back to admire their work with the kind of pride that comes from shared accomplishment. "He needs a name," Lila announced. "What should we call him?" She considered this seriously, then smiled. "Guardian, because he'll watch over the cabin while we're inside." Isaiah felt something shift in his chest. Guardian is a perfect name. As they walked back to the cabin, shaking snow from their clothes and warming their hands by the fire, Isaiah found himself thinking about that word, guardian. It implied protection, responsibility, permanence. When Lila curled up for her afternoon nap, she left her latest drawing on the table. This one showed the two of them building the snowman, but in the background was the cabin with warm light glowing. From the windows, at the bottom, she'd written a new word, home. Isaiah sat staring at that drawing, long after Lila had awakened, understanding that whatever legal or ethical complications lay ahead, he'd already made his choice. This child, with her careful trust and wounded courage, had become his family. Now he just had to figure out how to keep her safe from whatever forces had put those chains on her in the first place. The phone calls started on the 4th day. Isaiah's lawyer, his accountant, his board of directors, all demanding his immediate attention to the crisis that Marcus's betrayal had created. Each conversation was a reminder of the life he'd temporarily abandoned, and each interruption felt like an intrusion on the fragile peace he and Lila had built. "Isaiah, we need you back here," his lawyer, Patricia Vance, said during a particularly tense call. "Marcus is claiming you've suffered some kind of breakdown. He's using your absence to consolidate power and push through the merger we discussed." Isaiah watched through the window as Lila carefully positioned bird seed on the porch railing, talking softly to the cardinals that had become her daily visitors. The merger was contingent on my approval. He can, if the board declares you mentally incompetent. And your sudden disappearance, combined with his narrative about your increasing paranoia and isolation, is giving him ammunition. Isaiah's grip tightened on the phone. He'd brought a briefcase of legal documents to the cabin, thinking he might need them for reference. Now he pulled out the file on Marcus's betrayal, pages of evidence documenting the theft of proprietary technology, the secret funding of a competing venture, the careful orchestration of what amounted to corporate sabotage. "I have proof of his theft," Isaiah said. "The board has seen the evidence. Evidence that Marcus claims you fabricated as revenge for his necessary intervention in your declining mental state. Isaiah, you need to understand how this looks. You disappeared without warning. You're not returning calls from key investors. And meanwhile, he's running the company efficiently and profitably." Lila had finished with the birdseed and was now drawing in the snow with a stick, creating elaborate patterns that showed the same artistic sensibility as her paper drawings. She looked up and waved at Isaiah through the window, and he waved back automatically. "I need more time," Isaiah said. "Time is what we don't have. The board meeting is scheduled for next week. If you're not there to defend yourself, I'll handle it." Isaiah cut her off. "Send me the files. I'll review everything and make a decision." After hanging up, Isaiah sat at the kitchen table with the corporate betrayal documents spread before him. Page after page of legal maneuvering, financial projections, and character assassination disguised as concern for his welfare. Marcus had been thorough, every shared confidence, every moment of vulnerability, weaponized into a narrative of mental instability. The irony wasn't lost on Isaiah. His decision to protect Lila, to prioritize her well-being over corporate politics, was being used as evidence of incompetence. But looking at her through the window, safe, healing, beginning to trust, he couldn't bring himself to regret the choice. "What are those papers?" Lila asked, coming inside with rosy cheeks and snow-damp mittens. "Work stuff," Isaiah said, starting to gather the documents. "Nothing interesting." But Lila was studying the papers with that careful attention she brought to everything. "The man in the picture looks mean." Isaiah glanced down and realized she was looking at a printed photo from a company newsletter. Marcus at last year's corporate retreat, arm around Isaiah's shoulders in a pose of friendship that now seemed calculated. "You're very perceptive," Isaiah said. "He is mean. He hurt me the way some people hurt you." Lila nodded solemnly. "Mean people pretend to be nice first." The simple truth of that statement hit Isaiah like a physical blow. This 6-year-old child understood manipulation in a way that most adults never would, because she'd lived through it. "Yes," Isaiah said, "they do." That afternoon, while Lila napped, Isaiah began his own investigation into her background. Using his laptop and corporate research resources, he searched missing children databases, foster care records, and local news reports. He was careful to route his searches through secure networks. If someone was looking for Lila, he didn't want to make their job easier. What he found was troubling in its absence. No missing person reports that matched her description, no photographs in state databases, no records of a child named Lila in the local school systems or medical facilities. It was as if she'd never existed in any official capacity. Isaiah tried a different approach, searching for information about the property where he'd found her. The oak grove sat on land that bordered several other parcels, some privately owned, others state forest. Property records showed a complex history of ownership changes, but nothing that explained how Lila had ended up chained there. The wooden cross around her neck remained the most tangible clue to her past. Isaiah photographed it carefully while she slept, then ran the image through reverse search engines and religious jewelry databases. The style was common enough, machine-carved rather than handmade, the kind sold in gift shops and religious bookstores across the country. His phone rang again, interrupting his research. Unknown number, local area code. "Mr. Reed." This is Sheriff Tom Bradley from Essex County. I understand you're staying at the old Reed cabin? Isaiah's pulse quickened. That's right. We've had some reports of unusual activity in your area. Vehicle tracks, signs of habitation in some of the abandoned properties. I was wondering if you'd noticed anything out of the ordinary. Through the living room doorway, Isaiah could see Lila still sleeping on the sofa, her wooden cross catching the light from the fire. What kind of unusual activity? Probably nothing serious. Hunters, maybe some folks looking for shelter. But there's been talk about transient populations, people who might not have the area's best interests at heart. You being alone up there, I wanted to make sure you're keeping your eyes open. The conversation felt both routine and loaded with subtext. Sheriff Bradley's tone was friendly enough, but there was something searching in his questions, as if he was fishing for specific information. I appreciate the concern, Isaiah said carefully. Everything's been quiet here. Good, good. And you're up there by yourself? No family visiting? Isaiah's grip tightened on the phone. Just me. Well, you let us know if anything changes. We like to keep track of our residents, especially during the winter months when help might be far away. After the sheriff hung up, Isaiah sat staring at his phone. The timing of the call, the specific questions about family and unusual activity, it felt too coincidental. He walked to the window and studied the driveway, the tree line, the approaches to the cabin. If someone was watching the property, where would they position themselves? His military training, dormant for decades, began to resurface. Isaiah had been Delta Force before business school, before the tech empire, before he'd learned to fight with lawyers instead of weapons. The skills felt rusty but accessible. Situational awareness, threat assessment, tactical planning. Lila stirred on the sofa, murmuring in her sleep. Whatever dangers might be circling them, she was depending on him to keep her safe. The corporate documents scattered across the table seemed trivial compared to that responsibility. Isaiah made a decision. He called Patricia back. I need you to prepare a full power of attorney, he said. Corporate and personal. If something happens to me, Isaiah, what's going on? You're scaring me. I'm handling a situation that might get complicated. If the board wants to remove me, let them. Try. But I won't be returning to the city until this is resolved. What situation? What aren't you telling me? Isaiah looked at Lila, still sleeping peacefully despite the chaos swirling around her. Someone needs my protection. And for once in my life, that's more important than profit margins. As evening fell, Isaiah prepared the cabin for a potential siege. He checked window locks, secured the back entrance, and positioned supplies for quick access. The corporate betrayal that had driven him here seemed like another lifetime. This was about something much more fundamental, the choice between safety and convenience, between doing what was legal and doing what was right. Outside, snow began falling again, erasing tracks and muffling sounds. Somewhere in that winter silence, forces were moving that Isaiah didn't fully understand yet, but he understood enough. Lila was his daughter now, in every way that mattered, and he would protect his family, whatever the cost. The discovery came by accident. Isaiah was helping Lila into a fresh set of clothes after her bath, when something crinkled in the pocket of her old jeans, the ones she'd been wearing when he found her. He'd washed them several times, but apparently missed checking all the pockets thoroughly. What's this? Isaiah asked, pulling out a small, folded square of paper. Lila's eyes went wide, and she snatched for it instinctively. Mine! Of course it's yours, Isaiah said, handing it over immediately. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to take something that belongs to you. Lila clutched the paper against her chest, breathing hard. It was the first time since those early hours that she'd shown real distress, and Isaiah felt terrible for triggering it. It's okay, he said gently. Whatever it is, it's yours. I won't try to take it away. Slowly, Lila's breathing returned to normal. She looked at Isaiah for a long moment, as if weighing whether to trust him with something precious. Finally, she unfolded the paper, a photograph worn soft from handling. The image showed a family of three, a woman with kind eyes and braided hair, a man with a gentle smile and work-roughened hands, and between them, a younger version of Lila. Maybe 4 years old, all three were dressed in their best clothes, standing in front of what looked like a small church. "Is this your family?" Isaiah asked softly. Lila nodded, tracing the faces with her finger. "Mama and Papa, before the bad people came." Isaiah felt his chest tighten. "Can you tell me about the bad people?" Lila was quiet for so long that Isaiah thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "They said Mama and Papa didn't want me anymore. They said I had to go with them to be good. Do you remember their names? The bad people. Sister Margaret and Mr. Jim. They had a big car and they said God wanted me to come with them." Lila looked up at Isaiah with eyes too old for her face. "But God wouldn't want children to be scared, would he?" Isaiah's throat felt raw. "No, sweetheart. God wants children to be safe and loved." The photograph revealed more mysteries than it solved. The family looked genuinely happy, not like people who would abandon their child. And Lila's mention of Sister Margaret suggested religious involvement, possibly someone using faith as a tool for manipulation. That evening, while Lila colored quietly at the kitchen table, Isaiah studied the photograph under a magnifying glass. The church in the background had distinctive architecture, white clapboard with a bell tower and what looked like a hand-painted sign. If he could identify the location, he might be able to trace Lila's real family. He also noticed something else. The man in the photo wore a simple wedding ring, and the woman had a small cross pendant, different from the wooden one Lila carried now. Her current necklace had been given to her later, possibly by whoever had taken her. "Lila," Isaiah said carefully, "do you remember where you lived with your mama and papa?" "In the yellow house," she said, not looking up from her drawing, "with the garden and the cat named Whiskers." "Do you remember the name of your town?" Lila shook her head. "Just home." Isaiah tried a different approach. "What about your last name? Do you remember your whole name?" "Lila Marie Thompson," she said promptly. "Mama said my name was beautiful like a flower." Thompson. Isaiah made a mental note and returned to his computer, searching for missing persons reports involving a Lila Thompson. Again, he found nothing current, but when he expanded the search to include historical reports, something appeared that made his blood run cold. A news article from 18 months ago from a small town in Vermont. "Local family dies in house. Fire, daughter's body not found." The accompanying photo showed the same faces from Lila's hidden photograph. David and Maria Thompson, ages 34 and 32, died when their home caught fire during the night. Authorities had assumed their 6-year-old daughter, Lila Marie Thompson, also perished in the blaze, but her remains were never recovered from the rubble. Isaiah read the article 3 times, his hands shaking. According to the official report, the fire had been caused by faulty wiring. The Thompsons had been active members of their local community church, and David had worked as a carpenter while Maria taught Sunday school. They'd been survived by no immediate family, and the church had held a memorial service for all 3 victims, but Lila was alive, which meant either she'd escaped the fire and somehow ended up in the hands of people who'd abused and abandoned her, or, more chillingly, the fire hadn't been an accident. "Lila," Isaiah said, keeping his voice carefully neutral, "do you remember a fire at your house?" Her coloring stopped abruptly. She set down her crayon and looked at him with those 2 knowing eyes. "The night everything changed," she said quietly. "Sister Margaret came and got me before the fire started. She said God told her I was special, that I needed to come with her to do important work." Isaiah's stomach dropped. "Sister Margaret came before the fire?" Lila nodded. "She was waiting in her car. She said Mama and Papa would meet us later, but they never came." The implications hit Isaiah like a physical blow. Lila had been taken before her parents died. The fire that killed David and Maria Thompson hadn't been an accident. It had been cover for kidnapping. That night, after Lila had fallen asleep, Isaiah conducted deeper research into the Thompson family case. What he found painted a disturbing picture of corruption and cover-up. The fire investigation had been cursory, the insurance claim processed quickly, and the case closed within weeks. No serious search for Lila's body, no investigation into how a child could disappear so completely from a house fire. He also found references to Sister Margaret Blackwood, associated with something called the Sacred Heart Children's Mission. On paper, it looked like a legitimate religious organization providing care for orphaned and abandoned children. But when Isaiah dug deeper, using corporate investigation techniques he'd learned over the years, the organization's funding sources were murky, its locations constantly shifting, and its records suspiciously incomplete. The Sacred Heart Children's Mission wasn't a rescue organization, it was a front for something much darker. Isaiah's phone buzzed with a text message from another unknown number. "The child belongs with us. Return her, and there will be no consequences for you." His blood turned to ice. Someone knew Lila was here. Someone knew exactly who she was and what she represented. Isaiah immediately checked all the locks, then positioned himself where he could see both the front entrance and Lila's sleeping form. His Delta Force training kicked in fully now. Threat, assessment, defensive positioning, preparation for multiple scenarios. Another text came through. "You have 48 hours to consider our generous offer. After that, we cannot guarantee your safety." Isaiah turned off his phone and removed the battery. If they were tracking him electronically, that would at least slow them down. But the messages confirmed his worst fears. The people who'd taken Lila, who'd killed her parents, knew where she was. He looked at the child sleeping peacefully on the sofa, clutching both her wooden cross and the photograph of her real family. She'd survived unimaginable trauma, had been used by people who claimed to serve God, and had somehow maintained enough hope to trust Isaiah with her care. They wanted her back, and Isaiah was beginning to understand why. Lila wasn't just a victim of random child trafficking. She was a specific target, taken for reasons that went beyond simple exploitation. The careful planning, the religious cover story, the murder of her parents, it all pointed to something organized and intentional. But what made a 6-year-old child worth killing for? As dawn approached, Isaiah made coffee with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be. He had 47 hours to figure out how to protect Lila from people who'd already proven they would kill to get her back. The scared, isolated tech millionaire who'd arrived at this cabin a week ago was gone. In his place sat a man who'd found something worth fighting for, something worth dying for if necessary. His daughter was not going back to the people who'd stolen her childhood, not while he had breath in his body to prevent it. The note appeared. On the morning of the 7th day, slipped under the cabin door sometime before dawn. Isaiah found it when he went to check the perimeter, a single sheet of expensive paper, the kind used for corporate correspondence. The message was typed in a business-like font, no signature, no letterhead. "Mr. Reed, you have something that belongs to our organization. We know about your recent business difficulties and understand you may be acting irrationally due to stress. Return what you have taken, and we will ensure your corporate reputation remains intact. Continue this foolish course, and both you and your stolen property will disappear permanently." Isaiah's hands tightened on the paper as implications crashed through his mind. The reference to his business troubles wasn't coincidental. Somehow, the people who'd taken Lila were connected to Marcus's betrayal. He studied the note under the kitchen light while Lila still slept. The paper quality, the formal language, the veiled corporate threats. This wasn't from street-level criminals. This was from people with resources, education, and institutional power. Isaiah fired up his laptop and began connecting dots he'd previously dismissed as coincidence. Marcus's sudden betrayal had always felt calculated beyond simple greed. The timing, the precision of the theft, the immediate availability of competing funding, it required planning and coordination that suggested outside support. Now, armed, with new suspicions, Isaiah dug deeper into Marcus's recent activities. Corporate filings, travel records, financial transactions that he'd ignored in his initial investigation. What he found made his blood run cold. 3 months before the betrayal, Marcus had made a trip to a private retreat center in Vermont, less than 50 miles from where the Thompson family had died. The retreat was officially listed as a spiritual wellness center, but when Isaiah cross-referenced its directors, he found connections to the Sacred Heart Children's mission. More disturbing, Marcus's new venture was funded through a shell corporation that traced back to a network of offshore accounts, the same financial structure that appeared in the Sacred Heart's funding sources. Isaiah leaned back in his chair, pieces of an impossible puzzle clicking into place. Marcus hadn't just stolen corporate secrets. He'd been recruited, possibly years ago, by people who needed access to Isaiah's technology for reasons that had nothing to do with business competition. But what technology could possibly connect to child trafficking? The answer came to him with sickening clarity. 6 months ago, Isaiah's company had developed breakthrough facial recognition software capable of identifying individuals from partial images, even when significant time had passed or facial features had changed due to aging. The technology had military applications, but also potential for finding missing persons or tracking people who didn't want to be found. Someone had wanted that technology, and when Isaiah had refused to license it for questionable purposes, they'd arranged for Marcus to steal it instead. Lila stirred on the sofa, making the soft sounds that meant she was waking up. Isaiah quickly closed his laptop and tucked the threatening note into his pocket. Whatever was happening, she didn't need to be frightened by knowledge she was too young to process. "Good morning, sweetheart," Isaiah said, moving to the kitchen. "To start breakfast." "Morning, Papa Isaiah," Lila said, the name slipping out naturally. Isaiah froze, a cup of coffee halfway to his lips. She'd never called him anything beyond his first name before. Lila seemed to realize what she'd said and went pink with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "Don't apologize," Isaiah said, kneeling beside the sofa. I like it. Very much." Her face lit up with relief and joy. "Really? Really? If you want to call me Papa Isaiah, that would make me very happy." As they ate breakfast together, Isaiah studied Lila's face and wondered what made her so valuable to the people who'd killed her parents. She was bright, artistic, unusually mature for her age, but thousands of children shared those qualities. What made her specifically worth the elaborate deception, the murder, the ongoing pursuit? The answer came from an unexpected source. While Lila drew at the kitchen table, she began humming softly, a complex melody that sounded almost liturgical. When Isaiah commented on it, she looked up with surprise. "Sister Margaret taught me that song. She said it was special, that only certain children could learn it properly. Can you teach it to me?" Lila shook her head. "It's for children only. Sister Margaret said it opens doors that adults can't see." Isaiah felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of doors?" "I don't know. She never showed me, but she said someday I would use the song to help find other special children and bring them home to the mission." The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. Lila wasn't just a victim, she was intended to be a recruiting tool. Her natural innocence and trust would make other children comfortable, and whatever song she'd been taught was probably a signal or code used to identify. Safe targets for abduction. The people who'd taken her weren't just running a trafficking operation. They were building a network that used children to recruit other children, each victim becoming an unwitting accomplice in expanding their reach. And they wanted her back because she was trained, programmed, ready to be deployed. Isaiah's phone reassembled, with battery replaced, buzzed with an incoming call. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. Isaiah stared at the phone for 3 rings before answering. What do you want, Marcus? Isaiah, thank God. We need to talk. There are people looking for you, dangerous people. I can help, but you need to trust me. Trust you? Isaiah kept his voice level, mindful of Lila nearby. After what you did? What I did was try to protect you. The board wanted you completely removed, but I negotiated a partnership instead. These people, they're not interested in business deals. They want something specific and they think you have it. Isaiah stepped into the bedroom, lowering his voice. What people, Marcus? I can't explain over the phone. But Isaiah, if you're hiding something, someone, they'll find you. These aren't corporate lawyers or government agents. They're something else entirely. Something else? Like what? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Like people who don't consider law enforcement a relevant obstacle. Meet me tonight, the old logging road near your mother's place. Come alone, and I'll tell you everything. The line went dead. Isaiah stared at the phone, weighing his options. Marcus's involvement was no longer a question. The only uncertainty was whether he was a willing collaborator or another tool being used by whoever controlled the Sacred Heart mission. Either way, the conversation had confirmed Isaiah's worst fears. The people pursuing Lila had resources that extended far beyond typical criminal organizations. They had corporate infiltration capabilities, technological assets, and enough influence to operate without law enforcement interference. But they'd made one critical error. They'd underestimated what Isaiah would do to protect his family. He returned to the kitchen where Lila was putting finishing touches on a drawing, this one showing the two of them reading together by the fire. Normal, domestic, peaceful, everything. These people wanted to destroy Lila. Isaiah said carefully, "Do you remember the song Sister Margaret taught you? The special one?" She nodded. "Would you sing it for me? Just once, so I can understand what made it so important to her." Lila considered this request seriously. She said never to sing it around adults unless she told me to. "But you're different. You're safe." What came from her small voice was haunting, a melody that seemed both ancient and somehow electronic, with subtle harmonics that suggested mathematical precision rather than artistic inspiration. As she sang, Isaiah felt a deep unease, as if the music itself was designed to bypass conscious thought and speak directly to the subconscious. When she finished, Lila looked at him expectantly. "Pretty, right?" "Very pretty," Isaiah managed, though. His skin was crawling. Whatever that song was, it wasn't just music. It was a tool, carefully crafted to affect the listener in specific ways, and they'd programmed a 6-year-old child to use it. As evening approached, Isaiah prepared for his meeting with Marcus. He checked his weapons, a hunting rifle from his mother's closet, a knife from the kitchen, and the tactical skills he'd hoped never to use again. More importantly, he prepared Lila's escape route. If something went wrong, if he didn't return, she had instructions to follow the stream to the main road and call the number he'd programmed into a basic cell phone. His lawyer, Patricia, who would know what to do. "Where are you going?" Lila asked as Isaiah put on his heavy coat. "Just to talk to an old friend. I'll be back before bedtime." "Promise?" Isaiah knelt down and took her small hands in his. "I promise I will do everything in my power to come back to you. You're my daughter now, and nothing will change that." As he walked toward the logging road, Isaiah reflected on how completely his life had transformed in 1 week. The isolated millionaire who'd arrived at this cabin would never have imagined. Himself, preparing for combat to protect a child he'd found chained to a tree. But love, he was learning, was the most powerful force for change in the universe. It could turn a wounded man into a father, a victim into a fighter, and a business betrayal into the catalyst for discovering what really mattered. The people who'd taken Lila, who'd killed her parents, who'd turned children into weapons, they were about to learn that they'd made a serious miscalculation. They'd awakened something in Isaiah that they had no tools to defeat. A parent's unconditional love. The logging road was exactly as Isaiah remembered from his teenage years. A narrow, dirt track that wound through dense forest, used by hunters and maintenance crews, but otherwise abandoned. Snow had drifted across the path, and his boots left clear prints in the pristine surface. Marcus was waiting beside his black Mercedes, expensive overcoat looking out of place in the wilderness setting. He'd gained weight since their last face-to-face meeting, and there were stress lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before the betrayal. "You came," Marcus said, relief evident in his voice. "I said I would." Isaiah stopped 20 feet away, maintaining tactical distance. His Delta Force training was fully operational now, cataloging potential threats and escape routes. "Start talking." Marcus glanced around nervously, as if expecting watchers in the trees. "This is bigger than corporate espionage, Isaiah. Much bigger. The people I got involved with, they're not just criminals, they're part of something that goes back generations. The Sacred Heart Children's Mission." Marcus's face went pale. "How did you—" He stopped, shaking his head. "Of course you'd figure it out. You always were too smart for your own good. Tell me about the mission, Marcus. Tell me what they really do." "I didn't know at first," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I swear to God, Isaiah, I thought it was legitimate. They approached me through a business contact, said they represented a religious organization that needed technology to help find missing children. The money was good, and the cause seemed worthy. When did you realize it wasn't?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at the snow between them. "When they showed me the real operation. The children they'd found. The way they were being trained. Trained for what? To recruit other children, to identify families that would be easy targets, to sing songs that made potential victims compliant." Marcus looked up with haunted eyes. "They have facilities across the country, Isaiah. Hundreds of children, all stolen from families who loved them, all programmed to be weapons in their own destruction." Isaiah felt sick. "And you helped them. I gave them your facial recognition software. I convinced myself that they would use it to reunite families, to identify children who'd been trafficked by other organizations. Instead, they use it to track runaways, to find children who've escaped their network. Why didn't you come to me? Why the betrayal, the theft?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "Because you would have done exactly what you're doing now. You would have tried to fight them, and they would have destroyed you. At least this way, I could minimize the damage. By stealing everything I'd built? By giving them what they wanted while keeping you alive." Marcus's voice cracked. "They don't just kill people who oppose them, Isaiah. They make them disappear in ways that destroy everyone connected to them. Family, friends, colleagues, everyone becomes a target." Isaiah absorbed this information, filing it away with everything else he'd learned about the organization pursuing Lila. "What do they want with her specifically?" "She's special. I don't understand all of it, but apparently some children have natural abilities that make them particularly effective at the recruitment process. Lila was being groomed to be one of their primary assets, a child who could convince other children to trust the mission. And now they want her back." Marcus nodded. "They're not going to stop, Isaiah. These people have resources you can't imagine. Government contacts, law enforcement connections, enough money to buy whatever influence they need. If you try to fight them, I'm going to fight them," Isaiah said quietly. "The question is whether you're going to help me or get out of my way." Marcus stared at him for a long moment. "You don't understand what you're up against. This isn't some corporate takeover you can outmaneuver with lawyers and accountants. These people kill without hesitation. So do I, when someone threatens my family." Something in Isaiah's tone made Marcus step back. For the first time since arriving, he seemed to see past the tech executive to the soldier underneath. "Your family?" Marcus asked. "Lila is my daughter now, and I will burn their entire organization to the ground before I let them touch her." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, Marcus providing details about the Sacred Heart's operations, their leadership structure, and the timeline for their planned retrieval of Lila. By the time they parted ways, Isaiah had a clearer picture of what he was facing and what he needed to do to protect his daughter. The drive back to the cabin gave him time to process everything Marcus had revealed. The Sacred Heart wasn't just a trafficking organization, it was a multi-generational network that had been operating for decades, using religious legitimacy as cover for systematic child abuse. They had government protection, law enforcement, cooperation, and enough institutional power to operate with virtual impunity, but they'd made one critical error. They'd given Isaiah 3 days to prepare. Back at the cabin, Lila was waiting by the window, her face lighting up when she saw his headlights in the driveway. "Papa, Isaiah," she called, running to the door. "You came back. I promised I would," Isaiah said, scooping her up in a hug that felt like coming home. "Did you have dinner? I made myself a sandwich, just like you taught me. And I drew you a picture." The drawing showed 2 figures standing together against a dark background, holding hands while storm clouds gathered around them. But overhead, there was a bright sun breaking through the darkness. "It's us being brave together," Lila explained. Isaiah felt his throat close up. This child, who'd survived so much trauma, was worried about his emotional state. "We are brave together, aren't we?" "The bravest," Lila agreed solemnly. That night, after Lila had fallen asleep, Isaiah began serious preparations for what was coming. He retrieved his emergency go-bag from the hidden compartment in his bedroom closet, a relic from his military days that he'd maintained out of habit rather than expectation of use. The bag contained everything a Delta Force operative might need. For extended operations, medical supplies, communications equipment, emergency rations, water purification tablets, and tools for survival in hostile environments. There were also items he'd added over the years: cash in multiple currencies, false identification documents, and contact information for people who owed him favors from his government service. Isaiah spread the contents across his bed, taking inventory and assessing what additional supplies he'd need. The threat they were facing required both defensive and offensive capabilities. He needed to protect Lila while simultaneously dismantling the network that threatened her. His laptop contained encrypted files from his military service, contacts in intelligence agencies, special operations units, and private security firms. People who understood the kind of war Isaiah was about to wage and had resources to support it, but first, he needed to ensure Lila's immediate safety. Isaiah spent the next 2 hours establishing multiple contingency plans. If the cabin was compromised, they had 3 different escape routes mapped out, each leading to pre-positioned supply caches. If they became separated, Lila had memorized contact protocols and safe house locations. If Isaiah was captured or killed, she had instructions for reaching people who would protect her. The planning process brought back memories of Afghanistan, of operations where civilian lives hung in the balance and failure meant innocent people died. The stakes felt similar now, but more personal. This wasn't about national security or geopolitical strategy. This was about a 6-year-old girl who called him Papa and drew pictures of them being brave together. Around midnight, Isaiah's secure phone rang. Patricia, his lawyer, calling from a number that wouldn't appear on any conventional phone records. "I got your message," she said without preamble. "The power of attorney is prepared, and I've activated the emergency protocols you established years ago. What kind of situation are we dealing with?" "The kind where corporate law won't be relevant," Isaiah said. "I need you to liquidate specific assets and transfer the proceeds to the accounts I specified. If something happens to me, everything goes to the child I'm protecting." "Isaiah, what's going on? This sounds like you're preparing for war." "Because I am." "And Patricia, if anyone comes asking about my whereabouts or the child, you don't know anything. Refer them to the emergency contact numbers I gave you. The people involved in this have government connections, so normal legal protections may not apply." After ending the call, Isaiah made additional preparations. He established secure communication protocols with a private military contractor he'd worked with during his government service. He transferred significant funds to offshore accounts that couldn't be traced or frozen. He sent encrypted messages to journalists and activists who specialized in exposing institutional corruption. If the Sacred Heart wanted to make this a war, Isaiah would ensure it was fought on multiple fronts. The final item in his go-bag was a worn challenge coin from his Delta Force unit, a token given to commemorate successful completion of their most dangerous missions. Isaiah had carried it through 2 combat deployments and countless classified operations. It represented brotherhood, sacrifice, and the willingness to do whatever was necessary to protect innocent life. Tomorrow, he would give it to Lila, not as a burden, but as a reminder that she was worth fighting for. As dawn approached, Isaiah reviewed his preparations one final time. Communications established, resources secured, contingencies planned. He was as ready as 25 years of military and corporate experience could make him. But the most important preparation wasn't tactical or strategic. It was emotional. Isaiah sat beside Lila's sleeping form and made a silent promise. Whatever came next, whatever sacrifices were required, his daughter would not go back to the people who'd stolen her childhood. She would not be used as a weapon against other innocent children. She would have the life of safety and love that her parents had wanted for her before their murder. The Sacred Heart Children's mission was about to learn that they'd targeted the wrong child. More importantly, they'd underestimated what a father would do to protect his family. The war was coming, and Isaiah Reed was ready for it. They came at dawn, just as Isaiah had expected. 3 black SUVs moving up the access road with the kind of coordinated precision that spoke of professional training. Isaiah watched them through binoculars from his concealed position in the tree line, counting personnel and assessing threat levels. 12 individuals, all armed, moving with military discipline. The lead vehicle contained what appeared to be civilian leadership, a woman in religious garb who could only be Sister Margaret, accompanied by 2 men in expensive suits. The other vehicles carried tactical personnel, their movements suggesting former law enforcement or military backgrounds. Isaiah touched the challenge coin in his pocket, the worn bronze disc that had seen him through impossible missions in impossible places. This morning, he'd given its twin to Lila, along with careful instructions about what to do if the adults failed to come home. Remember, he'd told her, this coin means you're braver than you know and stronger than anyone who tries to hurt you. If things go bad, you follow the stream to the road and call the number we practiced. Can you do that for me? Lila had nodded solemnly, clutching the coin like a talisman. Will you come back, Papa Isaiah? I'm going to try my hardest, sweetheart, but if I can't, remember that you're not alone. There are good people who will protect you. Now, watching the tactical teams deploy around the cabin, Isaiah activated his communications equipment and began phase 1 of his defensive plan. The woman in religious clothing approached the front door alone, her movements careful and non-threatening. Sister Margaret looked exactly as Isaiah had imagined from Lila's descriptions, middle-aged, with kind eyes that didn't match the coldness in her voice when she spoke. "Mr. Reed," she called out, "I'm Sister Margaret Blackwood from the Sacred Heart Children's Mission. I believe you have one of our children." Isaiah emerged from the cabin, hands visible but ready to move to weapons if necessary. "You mean a child I found chained to a tree, the one who was freezing to death?" Sister Margaret's expression didn't change. Lila was being prepared for a spiritual journey. What you interpreted as abandonment was actually a sacred ritual designed to strengthen her connection to divine purpose. By leaving a 6-year-old to die in the snow, by teaching her to rely on faith rather than earthly comfort. Children chosen for special service must learn to transcend physical limitations. Isaiah felt rage building in his chest, but kept his voice level. Where are her real parents? David and Maria Thompson were obstacles to Lila's spiritual development. They filled her head with secular nonsense and tried to prevent her from fulfilling her destiny. So you killed them. Sister Margaret shrugged with chilling indifference. God's will finds a way to manifest, regardless of human resistance. Lila belongs to a higher purpose now. She belongs to me now, Isaiah said quietly, and she's not going anywhere with you. Sister Margaret smiled, and Isaiah finally saw the predator beneath the religious facade. Mr. Reed, you're a businessman. Surely we can reach some arrangement. Your corporate difficulties could disappear overnight. Your reputation could be restored. All we require is the return of our property. She's not property, she's a child. She's a specially trained asset worth millions of dollars in development costs. We've invested considerable resources in her education and conditioning. Isaiah's hand drifted toward his concealed weapon. What kind of education involves teaching a child to recruit other victims? Lila has gifts that make her extraordinarily effective at identifying suitable candidates for our program. With proper guidance, she could help us save hundreds of children from meaningless secular existences. By trafficking them into abuse, Sister Margaret's facade finally cracked. By giving them purpose, by teaching them that their suffering serves a greater cause. These children would otherwise waste their lives in poverty and ignorance. Isaiah had heard enough. He activated the recording device in his pocket, ensuring that Sister Margaret's words were captured for later use, then signaled to his hidden backup positions. "Here's my counter-offer," Isaiah said. "You leave now, you disband your organization, and you turn yourselves in to federal authorities. In exchange, I don't destroy you." Sister Margaret laughed. "Mr. Reed, you're outnumbered 12-1. Our tactical team has surrounded your property, and we have legal documentation establishing our custody rights over the child. Your documentation is forged. Your tactical team is walking into a kill zone, and you've just confessed to multiple murders on a recording that's already been transmitted to federal investigators." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Sister Margaret's face. "You're bluffing." Isaiah smiled without humor. "Sister Margaret, I spent 15 years in Delta Force before I became a tech executive. You brought 12 people to threaten my family. I've eliminated larger forces with worse odds." The sound of helicopter rotors filled the air. Not rescue for the Sacred Heart team, but the private military contractors Isaiah had summoned as backup. The tactical advantage shifted instantly as armed professionals took positions around the property. Sister Margaret's composure finally broke. "You don't understand what you're interfering with. This organization has protected itself for generations. We have government allies, law enforcement contacts, had," Isaiah corrected, "because those recordings are already in the hands of people who specialize in exposing institutional corruption. Your government protection just became a liability for anyone associated with you." The standoff stretched taut as both sides assessed their changed circumstances. Isaiah could see the Sacred Heart tactical team realizing they were outmaneuvered, their movements becoming defensive rather than aggressive. "This isn't over," Sister Margaret said, backing toward her vehicle. "That child belongs to us, and we will have her back. Try it," Isaiah said simply. "I'll be waiting." As the black SUVs retreated down the access road, Isaiah felt grim satisfaction rather than victory. This had been the opening move in a longer conflict, not the resolution. But he'd established the terms of engagement and demonstrated that the Sacred Heart was no longer operating with impunity. Inside the cabin, Lila was waiting exactly where Isaiah had left her, clutching the challenge coin and watching the door. With anxious eyes, "Did the bad people go away?" she asked. "For now," Isaiah said, kneeling beside her. "But we need to keep being brave, okay? This might not be over yet." Lila nodded solemnly, then held up the challenge coin. "This helped me not be scared. It made me remember that I'm stronger than the bad people think." Isaiah pulled her into a hug, marveling at the resilience of this extraordinary child. "You, oh sweetheart, you're the strongest person I know." But even as he comforted Lila, Isaiah was planning the next phase of their war. The Sacred Heart had revealed their capabilities and intentions. Now it was time to take the fight to them. The FBI raid happened 3 days later, coordinated simultaneously across 17 states. Isaiah watched the news coverage from his hotel room in Albany. Lila curled beside him as federal agents swarmed Sacred Heart facilities from Vermont to California. The recordings of Sister Margaret's confession had been the catalyst, but Isaiah's military contacts had provided something even more valuable: a complete intelligence package documenting decades of the organization's criminal activities, financial records, victim testimonies, and evidence of government corruption that reached into the highest levels of several agencies. "Look, Papa Isaiah," Lila said, pointing at the television screen. "They're getting all the other children out." Isaiah watched as small figures emerged from what had appeared to be a legitimate children's home, each one wrapped in blankets and guided to safety by federal agents. Some of the children looked confused, others relieved, many simply exhausted by trauma they were too young to fully understand. "There are so many," Lila whispered. 237, Isaiah said, reading from the news ticker. "All safe now, all going to real families who will love them." The network's scope had been staggering. For 40 years, the Sacred Heart Children's Mission had operated as a sophisticated trafficking organization, using religious legitimacy to avoid scrutiny while systematically abducting children from vulnerable families. The victims were then programmed to recruit other children, creating a self-sustaining pipeline of exploitation. Lila's case had been particularly valuable to their prosecution because her memories, carefully recovered through therapy sessions, provided details about the organization's training methods and operational procedures. Her courage in testifying, through closed-circuit video, to protect her identity had helped convict dozens of perpetrators. Sister Margaret had been arrested at a private airfield, attempting to flee the country with falsified documentation and over $2 million in cash. The woman who justified child abuse as spiritual discipline was now facing life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. "Mr. Reed." A soft knock at the hotel door interrupted Isaiah's thoughts. He opened it to find Agent Sarah Chen, the FBI investigator who'd been coordinating Lila's case. "Good afternoon, Agent Chen. Any updates?" "Actually, yes." Agent Chen smiled, holding up a manila folder. "The paperwork you've been waiting for came through this morning." Isaiah's heart stopped. Inside the folder were legal adoption papers, officially designating him as Lila Marie Reed's adoptive father. Weeks of background checks, psychological evaluations, and legal reviews had finally culminated in this moment. "Lila," Isaiah called softly, "can you come here for a minute?" She padded over in her sock feet, looking between Isaiah and Agent Chen with curious eyes. "Are we in trouble?" "No, sweetheart," Isaiah said, kneeling to her level. "Actually, we have some very good news. Agent Chen brought us some special papers." He showed her the adoption documents, pointing to her new legal name. "This says that you're officially my daughter now, not just in our hearts but according to the law. Would you like that?" Lila's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, hope, joy, and finally a radiant smile that made Isaiah's chest feel tight with emotion. "I get to be your real daughter forever. Forever and always," Isaiah confirmed. "If that's what you want," Lila threw herself into his arms, with enough force to knock him backward. Yes, I want that more than anything." Agent Chen wiped her eyes discreetly. "There's one more thing. We've been tracking the children who were recovered from the Sacred Heart facilities. Many of them have been successfully reunited with family members or placed in excellent foster care situations. But we wanted you to know several of the older children specifically asked about Lila. They wanted to make sure she was safe." "Can I see them?" Lila asked. "The other children from the mission?" "Someday, when everyone has had more time to heal," Agent Chen said gently. "But they all wanted me to tell you something. They said you were the bravest one, and that thinking about your escape gave them hope that they could be free too." Lila processed this with the same serious consideration she brought to everything important. Will you tell them that they're all brave too, and that families are real and they last forever? After Agent Chen left, Isaiah and Lila sat together on the hotel bed, reviewing the adoption papers and talking about what their future would look like. They'd already found a house in a quiet neighborhood with excellent schools, and Isaiah had restructured his business to allow for much more family time. Papa Isaiah, Lila said, tracing her finger over her new legal name. What happened to my first mama and papa? Will I see them again? Isaiah had been dreading this question, but knew she deserved an honest answer. Your first mama and papa loved you very much, but they died in the fire. They can't come back, but they would be very happy to know that you're safe and loved now. Do you think they would like you? I hope so, Isaiah said. I think they would want you to have a family that takes care of you and helps you grow up strong and happy. Lila nodded solemnly, then brightened. I think they would like you. You're the kind of papa who keeps children safe. As evening fell, Isaiah found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a wounded, isolated millionaire, running from betrayal. Now he was a father, committed to building a life that prioritized love over profit, family over achievement. The legal papers made it official, but the transformation had happened the moment he'd found Lila chained to that tree. Everything else, the confrontation with the Sacred Heart, the FBI investigation, the legal proceedings, had simply been the process of protecting what already belonged to them both. Papa Isaiah, Lila said sleepily, are we going home tomorrow? Yes, sweetheart, we're going home. Home. For the first time in his adult life, Isaiah understood what that word really meant. 6 months later, Isaiah stood in the doorway of Lila's new bedroom, watching her arrange art supplies on the desk they'd picked out together. Sunlight streamed through windows that had no bars, no locks, no sense of imprisonment, just clear glass that looked out onto a garden where she'd planted flowers with her own hands. The house in Saratoga Springs was everything the cabin hadn't been: spacious, warm, filled with the sounds of normal life. Neighbors who waved over fences, a school within walking distance, a community that had welcomed them without questions about their unconventional family story. Papa Isaiah, Lila called from her desk, can you help me with this drawing? Isaiah entered the room and peered over her shoulder at the artwork spread across the surface. She was working on a large piece, a detailed landscape showing the cabin in the mountains, the oak tree where he'd found her, and the stream that had guided them both towards safety. But this version was different from her earlier drawings. Satis tree had full, healthy leaves and looked protective rather than sad. The cabin glowed with warm light, and in the foreground, 2 figures walked hand in hand toward a future that stretched beyond the edges of the paper. It's beautiful, Isaiah said, settling into the small chair beside her desk. What kind of help do you need? I want to add more. People, Lila said, pointing to empty spaces in the composition. All the children who got rescued and their new families. But I don't know how to fit everyone. Isaiah studied the drawing, impressed as always by her artistic vision. In the months since the adoption, Lila's talent had flourished under the guidance of an art therapist who understood how creativity could help heal trauma. Her work had evolved from expressions of fear and confusion to celebrations of hope and connection. Maybe, Isaiah suggested, you could show some of the families in the background, like they're all connected to the same story but living their own adventures. Lila's face lit up. Like a big community of people who found each other. Exactly. Like that. As Lila returned to her work, Isaiah reflected on how much their lives had changed. The adoption had been just the beginning of their journey together. There had been therapy sessions to help Lila process her trauma, medical appointments to address the physical effects of her ordeal, and countless conversations about building trust and understanding family bonds. Isaiah's business had undergone transformation as well. He'd restructured his company around ethical technology development, with a special focus on systems that could help find missing children and support family reunification. The betrayal that had once seemed like the end of everything had become the catalyst for creating something more meaningful. Marcus had eventually been arrested as part of the Sacred Heart investigation, though his cooperation with authorities had earned him a reduced sentence. His testimony had helped convict other members of the trafficking network, including several government officials who'd provided protection in exchange for financial kickbacks. "Papa Isaiah," Lila said, looking up from her drawing, "Mrs. Peterson said there's going to be a school art show next month. Can I enter this picture?" Mrs. Peterson was Lila's teacher, a gentlewoman who'd worked patiently to help her adjust to normal classroom life. The transition hadn't been easy. Lila, still startled at sudden noises and struggled with anxiety when separated from Isaiah for extended periods. But she was making friends, excelling academically, and beginning to trust that this new life was permanent. "I think that would be wonderful," Isaiah said. "But only if you want to share it. Some drawings are just for us." Lila considered this seriously. "I want to share it. Maybe other children who are scared will see it and know that things can get better." Isaiah felt his throat close up. Even after everything she'd endured, Lila's first instinct was to help other children who might be suffering. Her resilience and compassion continued to amaze him daily. The phone rang downstairs, and Isaiah went to answer it while Lila continued working. It was Patricia, his lawyer, calling with updates on the foundation he'd established to support trafficking survivors. "The Reed Foundation received another major donation today," Patricia reported, "and we've successfully placed 12 more children in permanent homes this month. The facial recognition software you donated is helping reunite families at an unprecedented rate." After the call, Isaiah returned to find Lila putting finishing touches on her drawing. She'd added small figures throughout the landscape, children playing, families embracing, communities gathering in celebration of connection and healing. "I'm finished," she announced, stepping back to survey her work. "It's perfect," Isaiah said, and meant it. The drawing captured not just their personal journey, but the broader story of redemption and hope that had emerged from the Sacred Heart investigation. That weekend, they drove to a professional photography studio for a portrait session. It was Lila's idea. She wanted a formal picture of their family to hang in their living room, something that would make their bond visible to everyone who visited their home. The photographer, a kind woman named Eleanor, worked patiently to capture images that felt natural rather than posed. The final portrait showed Isaiah and Lila sitting together on a simple bench, her small hand in his larger one, both of them smiling with the kind of genuine happiness that couldn't be manufactured. "This one," Lila said immediately when Elena showed them the proofs. "This is our family picture." The photograph now hung in their entryway, greeting everyone who entered their home with the story of love overcoming trauma, of family bonds that transcended biology, of two souls who'd found exactly what they'd been searching for. On quiet evenings, Isaiah sometimes returned to his mother's journal, reading her words about family, forgiveness, and the courage required to love fully. Estelle had been right about everything. Healing came through connection, strength came through vulnerability, and the greatest victories were measured in moments of ordinary happiness rather than extraordinary achievement. Lila was thriving in ways that went beyond recovery from trauma. She was becoming herself, artistic, thoughtful, generous, brave. The child who'd been programmed to recruit others for abuse had instead become an advocate for healing, using her art and her story to help other survivors find hope. As winter approached again, marking a full year since their first meeting, Isaiah and Lila made plans to visit the cabin, not to relive painful memories, but to honor how far they'd traveled together. Lila wanted to see the oak tree that had witnessed her rescue, to thank it for keeping her safe until her papa Isaiah could find her. "Will you be sad going back there?" she asked during their planning conversation. "I don't think so," Isaiah said honestly. That tree is where our family began. I think I'll mostly feel grateful." Lila nodded thoughtfully. "I want to leave the tree a present. Something to say thank you for bringing us together." They decided on a small plaque, engraved, with simple words, "In memory of love found and family chosen." It would be their way of marking the spot where two wounded souls had discovered that healing was possible, that trust could be rebuilt, and that family was created through choice rather than circumstance. Their story had begun with chains and ended with freedom, with fear transformed into courage, isolation transformed into connection, and two hearts learning to beat in the rhythm of unconditional love. Outside Lila's bedroom window, the first snow of the season began to fall, gentle, flakes that caught the light like blessings, covering the world in pristine possibility. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new challenges, new opportunities to prove that love was indeed the most powerful force in the universe. But tonight, Isaiah Reed sat in his daughter's room, watching her create beauty from memory, and knew, with absolute certainty, that he was exactly where he belonged.